In the summer of 1964, civil rights activists from the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Congress for Racial Equality joined forces to launch a nonviolent effort to desegregate Mississippi's political system. And if you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at whatmikehistory.com. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by Buy Me Coffee and Patreon page in the description below. Please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. But without further ado, let's get started. During a period between 1890 and 1910, Southern states effectively disenfranchised African Americans. This was accomplished by passing state constitutional amendments and other laws to impose financial costs, literacy tests, and residency requirements on voter registration. These practices were upheld by the United States Supreme Court, and even when they were overruled, states would create new methods to exclude African Americans, such as grandfather clauses and white primaries. They maintained this exclusion of blacks from the political system well into the 1960s. By 1964, the civil rights movement was well underway and had made significant progress. The Freedom Riders in 1961 had challenged Jim Crow laws in the segregated South, and Martin Luther King had delivered his renowned I Have a Dream speech in August of 1963 at the March on Washington. Despite this, African Americans in the South were still being denied their constitutional right to vote due to intimidation and violence, poll taxes, and literacy taxes. Without access to the polls, political change in favor of civil rights was slow to non-existent. This bleak reality, it became apparent that a broader strategy would be required to dismantle this systemic prejudice. Consequently, the Council of Federated Organizations was established in 1962. This was an amalgamation of the 4 major civil rights groups: the NAACP, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the Congress for Racial Equality. And this marked a major shift in the civil rights movement, transforming it from a set of individual battles to a statewide strategy. The Council for Federated Organizations' primary goal was to confront voting discrimination. Its larger mission included eliminating political, economic, and social disparities through nonviolent means. They believed that a multifaceted civil rights organizational campaign involving voter registration, education, and community. Mississippi was then chosen as the site for the Freedom Summer Project because of its historically low levels of African American voter registration. At that time, Mississippi's voter registration process required African Americans to fill out a 21-question form and answer a question about one of the 285 sections of the state constitution to satisfy white registrars. And registrars would still often rule against African American applicants, denying them the right to register. And by 1962, less than 7% of the state's eligible black voters were registered to vote. Bob Moses began planning for the Freedom Summer in the spring of 1964, recruiting passionate speakers to engage college campuses across the nation. His recruits comprised mostly of white college students from middle to upper class backgrounds. The SNCC's idea was to recruit white individuals was a strategic move and aimed at drawing the public and media's attention to their cause. The training of volunteers was an important part of the preparation and was held at Western College for Women in Oxford, Ohio, where they learned about voting registration laws, procedures, and challenges that were particular to Mississippi. Role-playing, psychological preparation were crucial in this training. Moses asked his staff and volunteers to commit to nonviolence, but few could oversee the extent of the danger that they would be facing. They were warned about the high risk of arrest and violence and were encouraged to read books such as Dr. King's Stride Towards Freedom and Lillian Smith's Killers of a Dream to mentally prepare themselves for this experience. However, the initiative faced intense oppression. Among the first wave of volunteers on June 15th were 2 white students from New York, Michael Swerner and Andrew Goodman, and a local black man named James Chaney. And soon the 3 would disappear after visiting Philadelphia, Mississippi. This sparked a nationwide manhunt for the killers and brought attention to the civil rights movement. When the men went missing, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and the Council of Federated Organization workers began phoning the FBI to request an investigation. After a public outcry, the Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy authorized the FBI to get involved in the search. FBI agents began swarming Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Chaney, Goodman, and Swerner were arrested after investigating the burning of a local black church, which had been the center of political organizing. For 7 weeks, FBI agents and sailors from the nearby naval base searched for their bodies, wading through swamps and hacking through underbrush. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover even went to Mississippi on July 10th to open up the first FBI office in the state. Throughout the search, Mississippi papers and word of mouth perpetuated the common belief that the disappearance was a hoax designed to draw publicity. But soon, however, it was discovered that the men had been killed by the Ku Klux Klan with help of a local policeman. Dr. King would characterize their brutal deaths as an attack on human brotherhood taught by all great religions of mankind. The activists of the Freedom Summer Project were shaken by the murders, but they were undeterred. The Freedom Summer Project was met with great violence, including numerous murders, bombings, kidnappings, and the torture of activists and local residents. This brought attention to the civil rights movement, but it also led to the Freedom Summer Project being denounced at all levels of Mississippi society. The state senators and the governor publicly refused to obey federal immigration laws. The state police doubled in size. Legislators passed new laws prohibiting picketing and leafing, and local sheriffs and police expanded their forces and acquired new weapons. Business leaders created the White Citizens Council to punish those involved in the Freedom Summer Project, and Black Mississippi residents' homes were foreclosed on. They were fired from their jobs. They were denied access to stores, and food pantries were shut down. Additionally, white supremacist groups such as the Ku Klux Klan targeted civil rights workers and Black residents. Between June 16th and September 30th of 1964, there were at least 6 murders, 29 shootings, 50 bombings, more than 60 beatings, and over 400 arrests of project workers and local residents. Despite this violent atmosphere, other Freedom Summer activists were able to establish 41 freedom schools, which educated over 3,000 students. These schools did not just solely focus on traditional subjects like math and reading, but they also incorporated Black history, civics, and leadership training to foster a political consciousness and empower the African American community. The concept of freedom schools was not about basic education, but it was about providing a place where youngsters could voice their concerns, think critically, and dream about a more equitable future. Following freedom schools and the voter registration drive came the establishment of the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party. A major roadblock to gaining voting rights in Mississippi and across the South were state Democratic parties because Black Mississippians were barred from Democratic primaries and caucuses. So they formed the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party and challenged the legitimacy of the all-white delegation of the state's Democratic Party. In 1964, the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party achieved national recognition for this challenge of the status quo of racial discrimination by the United States, led by luminaries such as Fannie Lou Hamer, Annie Devane, and Victoria Gray. The Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party advanced its argument at the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. They argued that the state's regular Democracy Party was illegitimate due to the exclusion of Black folks. The Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party argued that they should replace them as Mississippi's representatives as the Democratic delegation. However, they were met with hostility and resistance from the political establishment. At the convention, a 68-person delegation brought attention to their cause. One of those delegates was Fannie Lou Hamer. Hamer gave a very powerful testimony about the injustices faced by African Americans in Mississippi. She would state that this is America, land of the free, home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our phones off the hook because our lives are threatened daily, just because we want to live decent human beings in America. President Lyndon B. Johnson, however, wanted a peaceful, non-controversial convention, and this led to threats made against supporters in line for federal appointments and withholding money from Martin Luther King Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Eventually, a compromise was proposed for 2 seats for the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party and full seatings for the all-white delegation. No discussion was ever held with the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party about this compromise. After intense discussion, the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party would reject this compromise, with Fannie Lou Hamer famously stating that we didn't come all this way for no 2 seats. We all is tired. This challenge, despite not succeeding, was an historic confrontation of the deeply rooted racism and the United States political system and resonated far beyond Mississippi's borders. The exposure they brought to the racial discrimination ingrained within the political system played a pivotal role in the passing of the Civil Rights Act, calling for an end of racial segregation, and it was undoubtedly a major victory sparked by their struggle. Additionally, the Mississippi Freedom Democracy Party challenged other states to reassess their electoral practices and confront their own racial discrimination. Ultimately, the legacy of the Freedom Democracy Party in promoting democracy, equality, and racial justice created a profound and far-reaching change in the American political system and the social landscape. In the aftermath, the Freedom Summer stands as a pivotal campaign that accelerated the civil rights movement despite not instantly resulting in a large upsurge in African American voting as it intended. In the summer of 1964, around 17,000 Black citizens in Mississippi bravely confronted racial prejudice by registering to vote. Out of these, a mere 1,600 applications were accepted. The objective of the Freedom Summer would have to extend beyond simple voter registration and including injecting diversity into Mississippi's deeply segregated political system. The true impact of the Freedom Summer lies beyond the numbers. The event acted as a beacon, highlighting the unintended issues of racial discrimination and racial violence in the Deep South. The immense attention attracted from the national media and the rest of the country made aware of the systemic oppression by African Americans in the Delta. This attention compelled Lyndon B. Johnson and Congress to act and eventually led to the Civil Rights Act 1964 and the Voting Rights Act 1965. However, the Freedom Summer also created an internal division and complexity within the civil rights movement. Some activists were frustrated by the national attention drawn by the white volunteers' involvement. There were also accusations that the white students had a dismissive attitude and too much control over the civil rights movement. These divisions, coupled with the discontentment of white student involvement, gave rise to more militant factions, which led to a demand for more Black power-centered organizations. Thank you. I'm your host, Country Boy. This has been One Mic History. If you like stories like this, you can find more stories like this at onemichistory.com. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so on my Buy Me Coffee and Patreon page in the description below. Give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts and support the YouTube channel. Peace.